Hi, everybody. You're listening to Comics and History, episode number 125 The Curious Case of Earth B. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Rygate, and class is back in session as we have hit yet another milestone episode, number 125. Sure took us a bit longer than expected to reach episode 125, I know. At the outset, I didn't foresee my look at the Ostrander Mandrake run on the Spectre going as long as 8 separate recordings, but hey, it was just such an amazing series. I just couldn't help but spoil the heck out of that series. But I figured going into a milestone episode, and for the next couple of episodes at least following this one, we'll turn our attention to other things, just give a bit more variety, and then later on towards the end of the summer, fall, get back to looking at the Spectre. And that'll be fun because I'll be looking at the Hal Jordan Spectre, which is becoming increasingly obscure, what with all of the realignments in DC Comics history over the last 15 years and change. I must thank wonderful listener of the show, Jason, for inspiring the topic for today's episode. Earth B is one of those topics which is perfect for a show like Comics and History, in that my original mandate was to look at the more obscure elements of comics history, to look at things which at the time weren't as big as certain other characters or storylines that are going on in comics. Also looking at things which have faded into more relative obscurity as years have gone by. And certainly with all of the crisis level history, reality altering events that have gone on at DC Comics in the past 30 plus years, Earth B is one of those concepts which, for older fans, is something which is well loved and remembered, but I think as time goes on, fewer and fewer people are aware that there was at one time this parallel reality which wasn't given a number designation, but rather a letter designation. So it'll be fun talking about the history of this concept, which started off, I think, more in jest and then became something serious as time went by. Now, I read Jason's original email a few months back on Comics and History, and Jason had a number of great suggestions for future episodes on the show. And one of his ideas was a look at the Batman Wildcat team-ups from Brave and the Bold. And that's actually going to be the focus for episode number 126. I've got to hit up Comixology and buy up those classic Brave and Bold issues from the Bronze Age. They're just going to be fun to read for my own personal entertainment, but to talk about them on the show, it's going to be really great. And for those of you who don't know or don't remember this, what really stands out about those Batman Wildcat stories is that the question of where those stories take place is a major focal point for readers, because of course Batman and Wildcat during the Bronze Age resided on separate Earths and could only meet up maybe once a year. So in talking about Earth B on this episode, I'm giving you a sort of a primer, sort of a heads up going into episode number 126. and just talking about a whole Earth that kind of sort of existed at one point makes for a great topic for a milestone episode such as this. So, Jason, thank you again for that email. And I do want to, in time, get to the other ideas which you suggested in that email. But certainly I'm looking forward to episode 126 and talking about those classic Batman Wildcat team-ups. But right now we're talking about Earth B. A really interesting concept. Something which I don't think you could say grew organically. Although if you look at comic stories that were written over the course of the late Silver Age and the Bronze Age, you might actually think that Earth B was something that DC was working towards creating, and it really turns out it's one of those happy accidents, and it's just a great concept for study by comics historians because much like its very creation, the history of Earth B is rather tangled, and there's questions as to whether Earth B can be referred to as a singular concept or whether it's actually a plurality of different concepts or realities. So enough of a preamble. Let's get into looking at the curious case of DC Comics Earth B. And just as a quick sort of review for everybody, DC's multiverse was brought into being in the Silver Age as a result of a number of fans writing into DC and saying, okay, we're loving Barry Allen and Hal Jordan and Katar Hall and Ray Palmer, but whatever happened to Jay Garrick and Alan Scott and Carter Hall and Al Pratt? Where do their stories come in? And this led to Gardner Fox and others coming up with the idea of a multiverse. And of course, Earth 2 was the first parallel reality to be explored, and it was explained that while the current generation of heroes resided on Earth 1, which at that time was considered our Earth, the heroes of the Justice Society of America resided on Earth 2, a world that had a history which was similar to our world's history, but was a world in which certain events unfolded differently. The primary difference, of course, being that the Justice Society first emerged in the late 30s and early 40s and fought crime at home and overseas during World War II, whereas on Earth 1, the heroes were still in their prime, in their 20s or 30s in the present day, and bulk of them became members of the Justice League of America. From there, Earth 3 was introduced. This was the home of the Crime Syndicate of America. There was also Earth Prime, which was revealed to be our Earth, and on Earth Prime, all of the members of the Justice League, the Teen Titans, Justice Society, everybody, they were all comic book characters. And of course, real world DC personnel such as Julius Schwartz and Carrie Bates and Elias Magan had their own crossover tales with the residents of the Earths 1 and 2. But then, of course, things got fudged in the later years of the Bronze Age as Ultra became the first superpowered hero to appear on Earth Prime. And then, as Crisis on Infinite Earths was unfolding, it was revealed that there was a Clark Kent on this Earth who, at the time of the crisis, discovered his Kryptonian heritage and became Superboy Prime. In addition to those Earths, Earth 4 was introduced at the time of Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was a way of bringing in the recently acquired Charlton Comics characters, such as Blue Beetle, bringing them into the DCU. There was Earth S, which had been introduced earlier in the Bronze Age. This was a way of bringing in the Marvel family, Captain Marvel, and everybody. There was Earth X. That was DC's way of bringing in its then recently acquired Quality Comics characters, such as the Freedom Fighters. A really neat concept there, explaining that Uncle Sam and the Freedom Fighters originated on Earth 2, but then moved to Earth X after finding out that that Earth had been effectively conquered by the Nazis during World War II. And of course, there was Earth 6, which was introduced during Crisis. That was the home of Lady Quark. There's Earth C, home to Captain Carrot and his amazing zoo crew. And so there was this idea that there was an infinite number of Earths and universes within the DCU, but only a handful got an official designation and were explored to any great degree. Here and there, you'd see a random parallel reality, such as the Earth, which was featured in To Kill a Legend, from my all-time favorite one and done story in Detective Comics number 500. Now, the rules for multiversal travel were set down pretty well in the Silver Age, and writers did a pretty good job of sticking to the rules for interdimensional travel. The idea was that all of these Earths existed in basically the same space, but were all separated by different vibrational frequencies. And those vibrational frequencies were strong enough to separate all of the multiple realities for much of the year, except there would be these brief points each year in which the vibrational barrier became weak, and so standard teleportation technology allowed for all of those great annual JLA, JSA team-up stories. It was also established that certain characters who had certain powers could travel from one Earth to another of their own accord, or with the help of some other apparatus. The cosmic treadmill could be used to help break the barrier that prevented individuals from traveling from one Earth to another. Certainly the Flashes, Barry Allen and Jay Garrick, were able to cross from one Earth to another at any point that they wanted to. In Green Lantern stories, it was established that Alan Scott could be brought forward to Earth 1 by the Guardians, and they could use the central power battery as conduit by which he would be summoned to Earth 1. Of course, the Spectre had the ability to travel between parallel Earths, and that wasn't surprising given his rather divine background. And you would always see this in multiverse stories where characters were crossing over. At least half a page would be devoted to a recap of the concept of the multiverse. In so many of these recap pages, you get a visual reference to the flashes of the two Earths, Jay Garrick and Barry Allen. It was just a neat example of how even in the Silver Age and the Bronze Age, writers were concerned with the idea of continuity, and I don't think they wanted the idea of multiverse stories becoming too common. They wanted to keep the concept of characters from Earth 1, Earth 2 crossing over to be